organization. We were founded in 1972 and were predominantly volunteer-run for decades until we were able to take on professional staff. Now we are a team of 6 full-time staff members, 2 part-time, and a full-time AmeriCorps member. So we have a robust professional team, but we could not do this work without you all, our volunteers. Our mission, as you heard, is to protect and restore the Mystic River, but also the tributaries and the watershed lands in the watershed, both for present and future generations, and to celebrate the value and beauty of our watershed. We do this work through a variety of programs. You can see we started off in 2009 with our water quality and policy and outreach work, and every year, or almost every few years since then, we've added multiple programs to really protect and restore this space, our newest of which are our environmental education programs and our climate resiliency. And you'll have an opportunity to hear from our education manager during this training about what that program entails. So I'd also like to thank our partners, of course, Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. They are the ones who own the dam, and we are here at their approval, and it's a privilege for us to be able to utilize the dam for this program, so we're very grateful. We also work with the Division of Marine Fisheries. They are the ones who collect our data and analyze it and use the statistical model to estimate the size of the population. And of course, the Medford Boat Club, who so generously is hosting us here today. We thank you very much. And I'd also like to thank our volunteer, Michael Fager, who's helping us with registration, and he'll also be the ones leading our first-time monitors to the ladder this afternoon. Without further ado, let Andy talk about the herring ecology.
Great. Well, welcome. I'm Andy Crescena, watershed scientist is my title at the Watershed Association. I do water quality monitoring and a variety of other projects. This is one of my favorite projects, and I get very excited, so forgive me if I start getting very animated about this. I think, how many people are new to this program? Oh, great, awesome. So you'll hear this story maybe for the first time. I think that I wouldn't have been, just gonna focus. I think in the past couple of years, we've been able to say that we're in the middle of, to say with confidence that we're in the middle of a kind of remarkable population recovery on this river, and it's a real ecological restoration story. That's going to be the punchline. You'll see. In the most urbanized watershed in New England, we're through the center of Boston, from Boston Harbor to Upper Mystic Lake and beyond. It's a remarkable story, and I hope to convince you of that. So first, what are river herring? They refer to 2 species, alewife and blueback herring. They can be a foot long or a little shorter. They're found in coastal waters and in rivers, and that's because they're migratory. They're so-called anadromous fish that live most of their lives in the ocean, but every year migrate to freshwater to spawn. Unlike salmon, they live to tell the tale, and they return, the adults return, and return every year. And it's that migration that we're witnessing at the dam. Spawning season from March to June, they arrive here around April. The adults find suitable place to spawn, to lay their eggs, and stay some time. It's not completely clear how long they stay, and then they go back to the ocean, leaving their millions or many offspring to fend for themselves, as fish do. Then the juveniles stay in the freshwater system and then go out to the ocean at the end of the season. They're formerly economically significant species, certainly ecologically significant. They're important to the food web. All sorts of things eat herring, both small herring and large herring. Striped bass, cod, bluefin tuna, in the ocean. And of course, as you'll see in spades here, birds, predatory birds, ospreys, which are specialists on fish and are seen at Upper Mystic Lake, loons, herons, bald eagles, as the guys with the long lenses are taking pictures of bald eagles. I'm sure they're looking for bald eagles today. Egrets, black-crowned night heron, which will appear at the dam when the fish appear. So it's they're supporting a very rich food web. And this is just a slide about that migration from sea to maturation. Well, let's do this. Start in the ocean. They migrate to the spawning area, spawn the eggs, emerge, and are born in the, juveniles are born in the freshwater system, in the lake or in the river. And spawning adults return the freshwater, the young stay in freshwater and then return to the ocean and join their fellow river herring. They remarkably return to the river they were born in, which will, as salmon do. Don't ask me how, it's amazing. I took a marine biology course once and the professor said, fish are smart, and it's something to remember. They make it back and repeat the cycle annually. It's notable that fewer than 1% of fish species around the world are diadromous. That is, either they move from freshwater to saltwater or saltwater to freshwater. It's a very unusual behavior. It's very stressful and sort of physiologically stressful. If you take the average saltwater fish and throw them in freshwater, they'll probably die pretty quickly, and vice versa. They're not used to that saline environment. So, so shifting is a physiologically stressful thing, but it's, to some species, worth it to either, I won't get distracted here, either to protect their young or to find more food in the ocean, but I'll move on. The big conservation background here is a dramatic decline in the species. So one reason we care about, that the community cares about these fish is that, like many fish, this is a chart from 1887 to 2015 of, not of fish populations, right, but of this surrogate for that, which is the millions of pounds, or the pounds of fish, goes to 60 million, 70 million pounds of fish caught by commercial fisheries. So you have to read this graph a little bit with that historical lens, right? This probably does not represent an increase in fish population. It represents an increase in human appetite and efficiency of fishing, right? So in the 19th century, they caught fewer fish, but that's just because they weren't as good at it as the trawlers in the 70s became amazingly good at catching fish. So a lot of, the graph for cod looks like this, lots of ocean-going fish looks like this. Big crash in the 70s and through the 90s. There are details here, but a moratorium on fishing herring was put into effect in the 1990s. So the fact that it's flat here, again, you have to read it as number of commercial fish caught. There should be very few here because there are very strict quotas on that. But this decline is almost certainly driven by over-harvesting in the ocean, right? This is overfishing, classic kind of thing, a big problem, and the big conservation problem behind this migration. But there's another, so if you imagine a population of river herring that are loyal to a river, they face multiple pressures. They face population pressures in the ocean, but also because they need freshwater habitat to spawn, they're vulnerable to pressures in freshwater environments too. And the big thing that we do that prevents, that inhibits the populations of river herring is put up dams. So this is kind of a cool graphic. It's a little hard to parse, but just look at the map part first. This is a map of dams put up in, this is sort of Massachusetts to Maine and the Gulf of Maine from 1630 to 1900. And the darker dots are the older dams, and the lighter dots are the relatively newer dams. The white dots are 1845 to 1900. The first dam is 1630. That was on the Charles River. European colonization of New England started building dams. Colonists started building dams early in that history. So now imagine that Charles River Dam, right? And imagine that it prevents fish that would normally, so these fish are in the ocean, they are detecting some signal, they say, okay, it's time to go inland to migrate, to spawn. They find their river, the mouth of their river, and they swim upstream, and they'll go quite far inland, right? They have an instinct to swim upstream, and they're looking for suitable habitat, but also they don't want to be super crowded, right? They want to spread out and use as much habitat as possible. So imagine the fish that now met in 1630, the dam on the Charles River. And I don't know the exact histories, but imagine that dam, they couldn't get over it, right? So it was a real block. Now, Charles River is 80 miles long. It has tributaries that lead to lakes. Imagine those many fish coming up to that dam. The Watertown Dam is 5 miles in on the Charles River, right? So they're coming back, they find the dam. Instead of having 80 miles of river, plus all those lakes, plus all those tributaries to spawn in, they now have just that 5 miles. So they'll do it, right? Those adult fish will come back and spawn. But all the juveniles are now constrained to not 176 square miles or whatever the watershed is, but to that 5 miles of river. And they'll return, but what the net result of that will be fewer juveniles generated and surviving to the following year, right? And there are probably two main factors. One is competition for nest sites, for spawning sites. They need a substrate to lay the eggs on. There's just going to be less surface area to lay eggs on that's suitable. And the second is sort of competition for food. So the fish that were way upstream in lakes with lots of food, the juveniles had a lot to eat. Here, they're all competing with each other. Fewer will survive. And so the next year, all those adults will come back. The same thing will happen. But each year, you're getting fewer and fewer juveniles, and the population will go down over time. So dams will lead to a decline in river herring populations. The kind of remarkable other thing on this graph is these graphs, right? So those graphs show in these sub-areas, they're all pointing to different little sub-areas of the map, the decline in breeding habitat area in those sub-areas over time. So what these guys did was, in a GIS system, said, okay, if you put that dam at the mouth of the Charles River, you go from 80 miles to 5 miles. So instead of a bar that's 80 miles high, right, or they would do it in terms of area, it's now, in the year after 1630, shorter. So this is the sum of all those freshwater habitats upstream of those dams as the dams go in. And you can see, especially sort of here in what would be the 19th century, the area, they had a ton of area here before these dams start going in. But as each dam cuts off upstream habitat, the area for potential breeding goes way down. So there's this historic loss of freshwater breeding habitat for river herring that's separate from what's happening in the ocean. And it's old historically, but certainly drove down river herring populations in the 19th century and before then. You know, they were famously abundant, right? Like Alewife Brook and Tea Station are named after this fish. It's lots of fish people tell these stories, but they say, you know, when they're coming into the rivers, you could walk on their backs across the river. They're so dense, right? This certainly pushed down river herring populations historically. Okay, so is that clear? If I made that clear, okay. It's that there's a lot of data on that slide, but now we come to our story. Okay, so imagine the fish that keep coming back to the Mystic River. There are 4 dams in our in this story. One is the Amelia Earhart Dam at Assembly Row, which was put up in the 1960s and separates fresh water from salt water. So the tide goes up and down 10 or 12 feet every 12 hours, yeah. And low tide water is let through. And it's the biggest dam on the Mystic. It's the most significant one in many ways. But oddly enough, it's not a player in this story because the fish can get past this one. When they let water through at low tide, the fish can pass through. So even though it's a big obstacle, they can get through it. They can ignore this one, believe it or not. The problem is this one, the next one upstream, right? So the problem faced by, if you think about it in terms of that Charles River story, the problem is that there's a dam up there that's preventing them from getting to upstream habitat. They're constrained to this area. The Upper Mystic Lake Dam, this one that we're on, prevented migration upstream for 150 years. There's a solution there. So what's the solution? How do you get river herring if you care about river herring? This is the old solution. And volunteers, much as yourselves, including I'm sure people in this room, engaged in our bucket brigade, where people would catch fish, kids and others, in nets, because they still see the dam as a signal to go that way, right? So because the water's flowing this way. So they're going to try to get over that obstacle. Problem is it was 8 feet high or 10 feet high and they couldn't jump. So what people did was catch them in nets. So they're pooling up here at the mouth, at where this flow is. And you can catch them very easily, put them in a bucket. Somebody at the top pulls up the bucket and literally throws them into Upper Mystic Lake. So this is the old school solution. The permanent solution that was installed in 2012 is this fish ladder, which is where you'll be counting fish. And it really is a ladder. These are pictures taken by David Messina, our great photographer of the watershed. You won't get this view. He had to climb into the structure and look down. But this is on top of the dam looking down at Lower Mystic Lake. So this is before they've opened the gate at the top. And this is when they have opened it and water's rushing down. And the fish literally, so they can't jump 10 feet, but they can jump 1 foot. And so they can jump from, so there's a step and then a little pool, and then they jump in, rest maybe, jump again. And then they jump, finally, on the last step, they jump into Upper Mystic Lake. And that's literally where you'll be standing and counting, believe it or not. By the way, I'll say this again. The only reason we know the following story I'm about to tell you is because of the work you've done. The only source of data that we have is the count data that volunteers provide from their 10-minute counts. It's the only way anybody knows this. But here we go. That's the permanent solution. So, in terms of area of breeding habitat, before 2012, just as a gross approximation, the fish were limited. So this Boston Harbor's up here. They're coming in from the ocean. They find the Mystic River. They were limited to the Mystic River and Lower Mystic Lake. They couldn't get beyond it. After 2012, they can now go from, they can get, first of all, to this big empty lake from a herring's point of view, to the next dam up, the Center Falls Dam in Winchester. So that happened in 2012. So sort of as a community, we did this experiment of doing that dam process in reverse, right? We didn't take out the dam. People who are interested in herring restoration prefer dam removal, but they're not going to remove this dam. But we did the next best thing, which is provided fish passage through the dam. They can get through it. So we're doing a big experiment as a community. We're saying, okay, what happens when you reverse the process of upstream habitat loss by allowing fish to places where they couldn't get to for 150 years? And the result is this, that this is 2012. Again, these counts are coming from you. Like, these are estimates of the total population that passed the dam, but the only data is coming from you. 2012, 200,000 fish. It's the last 2 years. These are error bars, so it's plus or minus. More than 600,000 fish. So the population of fish loyal to the Mystic River, by all appearances, and the Division of Marine Fisheries tells this story as well. This is a high confidence story that allowing fish access to this upstream habitat, and specifically that lake, allowed the population to triple in this creative time. Now, a careful listener, as I'm sure you are, will note that we didn't see anything for the first 3 years. It was level. So the really cool thing about this to me, and part of what ties this whole story together, is the following life history fact about river herring. The juveniles, they go to the ocean at the end of their first year. So they're born, they grow, and they go to the ocean. But then they stay in the ocean until they're 3 or 4, until they're sexually mature, and then return to spawn. So imagine you created a bunch more first-year herring in that first year. You come back in 2013, and you say, oh, the fish ladder didn't do anything because there's the same number of fish. But you just have to be patient. You come back in 2014, you're like, oh my God, there's still no evidence that it increased the fish population. But in the 4th year, exactly when you'd expect from that life history detail, those first-year fish were born in 2012. They wait till they're 3 years old to come back. So suddenly, you more than double the population in that 4th year. And that's part of what, like, you could say, maybe something else increased the population of this population of fish. But this very strong signal that stays high and is increasing seems like really, really strong evidence that this relatively cheap intervention, right, building a wooden structure in a dam, has tripled the population of this threatened species. I think that's just a really cool thing that everyone in this room and everyone in these communities and at the state can take credit for. I think it's really great. 600,000 fish, if they're a foot long, that's more than 100 miles of fish in a river that's 10 miles long. There are 500,000 people in our watershed, so there are more river herring than people. I speculated that when they're present, well, certainly after the juveniles are born, but even when the adults all arrive, they may be the most populous vertebrates in Mystic River watershed. Like, there's no bird species that has that many and there's no rodent. I think there aren't that many rats in the watershed. I think, but I don't know. But more than people. Anyway, remarkable thing, and again, all this data, this looks like it's coming from a scientific study, which it is, but all the data is what you write on little pieces of paper and put in the envelope there. That's the only source, and thank you in advance. So, to finish up, the next target now, right? So, if we want to continue this success story, and we do, and when I say we, I don't mean just the Watershed Association, but the Division of Marine Fisheries, the municipalities here. You want to start removing upstream dams as well, because this pattern can continue. The next big target really is Horn Pond in Woburn. There are two dams between here and Horn Pond. One is the Center Falls Dam in Winchester, and thanks to activist mobilization by John Kilbourne and many others in Winchester, people lobbied for a fish ladder here. So one was installed 2 years ago, and there's now, they're monitoring how many fish make it past this one. This one's a little trickier. The Horn Pond one, I don't know how many people know the outlet of Horn Pond, where Horn Pond Brook is coming out. There's a dam that fish can't scale. So we saw last season, we did the bucket brigade thing a little bit last season, where there's a dam and they can't get to it, but there's also a little kind of rivulet that comes off, that sort of pours across around the side of the dam structure. And that was also unnavigable, but people from marine fisheries and we went down there and they waded in and moved the rocks so that fish they made a kind of makeshift fish ladder out of rocks and water that allowed the fish to go up. And it wasn't perfect. There's now a lot of energy around finding money to put a fish ladder in Horn Pond. And so I encourage you to follow that story and really help advocate for this. We're ambitiously trying to replicate our program here of counting at Horn Pond this season. So we're hoping to get as many volunteers as we have here at Horn Pond to stand at the edge and count fish as they're going into Horn Pond. Last year we did that and got kind of rough data. We didn't have very much data, but thousands of fish entered Horn Pond for sure through that little passage. It should be better this year, but in any case, those graphs show the value of this monitoring now, even when let's say you're hoping the numbers go up, it's really, really valuable to have the low numbers first to show the success of, so imagine they do build a fish ladder there and the population goes up again. It's really valuable to have that dam removal data. So I encourage people who want to do Horn Pond 2 to do that. So that is it. I'm going to make a quick digression. I hesitate to do this, so I'll emphasize again, the counts you do are the source of our data. The counts you do are the gold standard, so they're the ones that the Division of Marine Fisheries uses. However, this is kind of an aside, many of you may know about this, but we have we installed a video camera 2 years ago at the fish ladder. And we have this kind of really cool, I won't go on about it, online mechanism where you can go in and count fish. You can count fish, you can enter a count, and it gets assigned to that minute of time, and a model tries to estimate how many fish are going through. So we're using crowdsourced labor in that case. But that's all volunteers, you're all volunteers. This is a super great citizen science project. But let me just play this video. So this is what you could expect to see on May 26th, 2018, last year on the video camera. And they were flying through here. By the way, if you were at the dam looking down, this is what you'd see from looking down. Just hundreds of fish in a minute. I think this was 300 We've had higher counts in a single minute of video. On the video, you can slow it down to 1/4 speed or 1/10 speed and count very accurately. When you're at the dam, this becomes a real challenge, and we'll talk about it. But they just were flying through. It looked like this on May 25th, which was my birthday, and I thought, oh, they're celebrating my birthday. But this is some of those 600,000 fish that, and it's not sped up, and it's not looping. This is just real time. So, to sum up, why is it important? It allows us to. Why is the program important? It allows us to estimate the spawning population. So, I should say the counts you give are samples. So you say, oh, in this 10 minutes, so many fish were going by per minute. Then that data is fed into a model that calculates the estimated total number of fish that go through. So it allows us to estimate that population, better understanding of the status of river herring, of course. The state uses this to detect trends across the state, so they compare our run to other runs in Massachusetts. There are many herring runs, especially on the Cape. Every stream that leads to the ocean will have herring going up it. This was that tallest bar in 2016. This was the biggest herring run documented in Massachusetts that year, more than the Herring River in Sandwich, I think. They beat us the next year. But this dam has led to this great recovery. And again, it shows the importance of citizen science. This is like stuff we can all participate in. I'm not a fisheries scientist, but I get to be part of this project, and it's just very exciting and gratifying. And I think the state really respects and values what we do. The Division of Marine Fisheries really supports our work amazingly and says that we have probably the best volunteer program. I'm not saying that just to flatter you or myself at all, but that is the most reliable, most number of counts, the best quality data. So that's it. So I will now